Welcome to Election Watch 2015. I'm your host, Teresa Wippel. In the studio, we have Mark Norton, who is a candidate for the Edmonds School Board of Directors, Position 3. Mark, welcome to the program.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Would be great if you could tell voters and those anyone else watching why you're running for the school board and what your background is.
Sure, certainly. So I'm running for the Edmonds School Board primarily because I have two kids enrolled in Edmonds schools, elementary school. They've got a long road ahead of them, not just in Edmonds schools, but, God willing, in college and beyond. And I've had a chance now to see a couple of years with their enrollment in the Everett School District and maybe comparison then to the last couple of years in the Edmonds School District, which is the district I grew up in, and some of the changes and some of the things that haven't changed in those many decades. And I'm slightly concerned. I see on a daily basis, I see the care and the compassion and the concern of their teachers and the administrators. And at the same time, I see the same old tired buildings, and you see these lists when school starts up of school supplies that are enormous, and you know that the operation is held together sometimes, I think, with bubble gum and duct tape, and just by the care of those people who are working in these schools. So I'm concerned about that trend, and that's a trend that I'd like to address, and I think the school board is the only place that it can be addressed. I'm concerned to a certain degree about the McCleary decision and how that's going to impact school districts, some of whom I don't know for certain about Edmonds, but some of whom might think that this is an opportunity to sit back and wait for all the new funding to roll in. And I think that there's a real threat that charter schools may become something that public school districts have to worry a lot more about, particularly with some interpretations of the McCleary decision. So I would say those are some of my motivations. I had a great education at the Edmonds School District. I think I did anyway. I'm no knucklehead. I'm pretty smart, and I think I had a wonderful education. And I'd like to be able to see that continue on into the future. So by way of personal introduction, I was born in New Jersey, but you can't hold that against me because we came west when I was very young, and so really essentially grew up out here. One of 5 kids growing up, and all of us went through Edmonds schools. And let's see, my 2 children, 8 and 10, we live in unincorporated Lynnwood, which of course is where Director District 3 is, just, I guess that'd be what, just east of 99, in that area, and west, of course, of Mill Creek. Let's see, I'm engaged to a wonderful woman, and we'll be married this fall, and my children love and adore her, and so it's, we're kind of one version, I guess, of the modern family, and I've been a volunteer in the Civil Air Patrol for, it'll be 29 years in a couple of months since I was a kid myself in their cadet program, and I've been a commander and an inspector general and all number of positions in the Civil Air Patrol, but one of the things that it has given me is this great opportunity to be a part of young people's lives. When I think back to the early days in the CAP for me, when I was just a young man out of the cadet program, newly as an adult officer, I think now that those kids that I was around and had a hand in turning into young leaders, they're young adults now. They have families now themselves, and I was able to have a part in that development. So I've always appreciated the development of young people from followers and learners into leaders and learners. So I'm a pilot, private pilot. I do that just for recreation, and certainly the CAP doesn't hurt my aviation interest. I enjoy my motorcycle, and kids and I like to go to the cabin on the weekends, and so that's probably me in a nutshell.
Okay, very good. That's great. And interesting, as a follow-up to your concerns about the lack of funds for things that you think are important, do you believe that's a result of misplaced priorities in terms of how the money's being allocated?
Yeah, it's hard to say, and I hesitate to throw stones, not having followed every single decision made over the years. It's probably easy to punt or play Monday morning quarterback, and I don't want to do that because I think that, more than likely just about everybody who has preceded me on the board has been people of good conscience and good character who do the best that they can, and you can look back on those decisions and say, well, how did we end up with what we've got? But I do have to wonder, when you look at the investment per student, say from the late 70s, when we finally started getting judicial decisions that said you're underfunding education, when you look at the investment of money per student, it was tiny then. It is more than triple adjusted for inflation now than it was in the 70s. Where is that money? What is it going to? Because we're using, in many, many cases, the same buildings we were using back then. They're too small. They're not, many of them are not air conditioned. They're not updated. They're cold in the winter. So from a physical infrastructure and investment in the environment that these children are in all week long, I'm curious about that. So I'm not sure that it's mismanagement or misinvestment, but I have other questions that I'm not sure that I've heard or seen either answered well or maybe not even asked, and I'm interested in asking those questions. Another one would be when you look at the staff ratio. The staff ratios are much better now than they were 10, 20, 30 years ago. So where, when we have those type of ratios where theoretically you've got more adults to fewer children, I'm concerned about graduation rates still being where they're at. So, Edmonds School District, we still have something like 5% of the students in a cohort that go through and don't graduate. Well, 1 in 20 is too many. That's way too many. Any is too many theoretically, but 5 out of 100 is far too many. And so I'm not certain, but that's one of the things that I can tell you gives me pause when I look at the investment of resources.
Okay. If you were elected, what would be your top 3 goals for, say, your first year?
Sure. So I mentioned one of them already, and that is a lot to do with infrastructure. If you look at the schools and you see how many portables we place, and I don't know if people still take pot shots at portables, but that's something that I don't recall from my youth. And I've talked to some classmates of mine from back in the day, and they say, well, we had some portables, but you practically have portable villages in some schools now, and I'm curious about that. This district in particular has taken a very protracted course to remodel and to building new facilities, and I think they've made some smart decisions. Certainly, Lynnwood High School, where that was raised, and instead they're putting up another building. From what I understand of the finances of that deal, it made a lot of sense. Wonderful, great, directionally the right thing to do. Why are we still placing portables at schools? Why are we still putting them down at Spruce and all these other elementary schools? What we know is that, in the next decade and a half, 2 decades, we'll have 1 million more people in Puget Sound. I can tell you that a bunch of them are going to settle within this district and within this area of the district. We ought to be looking at, in the long term, how we build schools that can accommodate them. Having a district full of 1-story schools is probably not the right way to go. We probably need to be looking vertical. So I think looking at the actual infrastructure of the district is a top priority for me. Beyond that, I would say, and I already mentioned this as well, graduation rates. I want to know as a student that I don't want to feel like there's a crack that's already been put in the floor, and I just have to avoid that crack, and 5% is a huge crack. So as a student, I want to know that there is an expectation that everybody graduates, that everyone I enter 9th grade with are the people I'm going to walk across that stage in 4 years with. That, as a student, is what I would want. As a parent, I don't want to wonder, is my son, my daughter, one of those 5 in 100 that is likely to not graduate with their class? So graduation rates and the achievement gap, we are addressing. I say we, in the royal sense at Edmonds School District, we're addressing an achievement gap among disadvantaged learners. Children who come from lower income households and households that don't have a tremendous amount of stability. They're addressing it as best they can, but I'm not convinced. I can tell you just from my own limited experience in my own children's education that many of their classmates don't have the support at home, and there are not resources to get them that support at home. There is no homework help at home. There's very little, in some of these households, there's very little English as a second language proficiency in the home. So these children, I can see already, in the 2nd and 4th grade, are already starting to be at risk for falling into that crack. And so what starts off as an achievement gap ends up as a failure to graduate. And in today's global economy, if you don't finish high school, it's astronomical odds stacked against you that you'll actually go to college or end up in a career that you like, that you want to do, and that promises good things for your future. I would say beyond that, from probably for the third priority, and there are so many of them, but one of them would be, recently there was a decision made on chipped rubber turf. And I think it's probably easy to jump on this one because it has been fairly public, but I think it speaks to what I see as sort of a systemic problem with some boards. And I don't know if that's the case here, but it seemed like a hasty decision, poorly made. And here's why I say that. Any decision that a board makes where the very next day the superintendent suggests that because of the decision we made last night and all the outcry that's come from it, we ought to put up warning signs expressing to people that it may not be safe to play on this chipped rubber turf. Well, that's a bad decision. You know, the decision you made last night results in a warning sign this morning. That might be something you want to revisit. So, and I know I can be cavalier about that, but I think that decision is problematic. And so those types of decisions are indicative of one of two things: either not enough research, or on the other end of the coin, boards can often get into this thing that I call analysis paralysis, where you will analyze something to death and you'll never act on it. And along the way, consultants, legal review, things like that can take an enormous amount of the pie. And so you end up with all this money invested in contingency and research, and you never get to the big decisions, and that's probably why we don't have new schools and a lot more school remodels going on. Or you are on the far end of the spectrum where you don't do your due diligence, you don't do the research, you make a hasty decision, and you end up with this outrage over a playing surface that our children will be using that may well not be safe. So I think intelligent decisions by the board, well researched but not researched to death, that to the extent that they cause paralysis, that'd be a third priority of mine. And as one voice on the board, I think I'd have a decent opportunity to express concern if I saw that we were moving in one of those two directions.
I wanted to ask you about the Common Core state standards. And for anyone who's watching who may not have been following this issue, probably only those who don't have children in school, because I think everybody else knows about it. National K-12 standards that emphasize career and college readiness for all students. And in some areas of the United States, and even in this state, they've generated some controversy.
Yeah.
Do you have any thoughts about whether those are a good thing or not a good thing for our kids?
I think they are, in the final analysis, a good thing. I think they're directionally correct. As with any drastic change in curriculum, there's a certain amount of shock. And I'll give you an example. Every night I see homework, and we're now a little bit into summer, and I'm very proud of myself. I have managed to assign homework every day, and I'm even more proud of my two kids. They have managed to do it every single day.
In the summer?
In the summer, yeah.
Wow,
I know,
that's impressive.
It's only a few minutes, right? And it makes me feel like I'm parenting well,
Yeah.
But one of the things that I see every single day and all throughout the year, doesn't matter the subject, but math is certainly the most vivid one, is that I have no idea how to do the problem that they're doing. I have to, half the time I'm Googling it. And so much of it is because they've changed. The curriculum has changed, and much of it is Common Core. And I get that. But that creates a lot of shock in me that I can't help them until I do my own research on it. But I think it is directionally correct, because I think there's a certain level of standardization that we have to embrace. We have to understand that children all across the country at a certain grade level, pick your grade level, ought to be able to perform the same functions, have the same abilities, all other things being equal. And I think that's a fair thing to expect. Where I think the wheels start to fall off the wagon, though, is the slow adjustment to feedback. The folks that we ought to be listening to when we're talking about enforcing Common Core standards are the educators, the people who see what the children struggle with on a daily basis. It's one thing to create a standard. It's another thing to actually implement it. Now, you can do all the beta testing you want, all the field testing you want, but at the end of the process, if it is making a subject less accessible, if it's making kids less successful in that subject, it needs to be rewritten, it needs to be modified. And I don't suggest that it be modified in Mississippi and Idaho and Washington. I do believe that Common Core should be Common Core. But I think that the thing that is probably woefully missing is the feedback portion, the feedback and the adjustment. And I understand that it is hard to turn the Titanic around, and an educational curriculum is a behemoth. But I think we have a responsibility to the children, the same way that we've had all along, to adjust the curriculum based on educator feedback.
Okay. All right. What about full-day kindergarten? Right now, our district offers full day via the lottery system in some schools, and
Right.
there are some schools where you get it no matter what, depending. On my understanding, it's based on free and reduced lunch.
That's right.
Percentage. And then, so for the other schools, you get lottery, and it's also something you have to pay for. Whereas in the schools with the free and reduced lunch, it's free. Is that something that you think? I had heard that eventually, in the next few years, everybody's going to be the state funding will catch up, and that eventually all schools will be able to offer, full day kindergarten for parents. But is that something that you think maybe should have been a priority sooner?
40 years ago.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great question. I couldn't support all-day kindergarten more strongly. It is way, way overdue. In my own experience, I couldn't afford to send my children to all-day kindergarten. And I think about it now, and it is a true regret that I have. I should have, I don't know, taken on another job or something. It was that worth it. Seeing the difference when you go into first grade, having it all day, every day, focused on schoolwork. When we say all-day kindergarten, we're really not talking Monday through Friday, 9 to 5. We're talking about a little shorter day. But having a daily touch point on the children, and a daily touch point on the children that lasts through the lunch period, I really think is a benefit that we can't overstate. And it doesn't, it's easy to say this, it doesn't cost all that much per student. And okay, Mark, find the funding for it then, But I think it absolutely is an educational priority, absolutely and completely. And I don't know yet if you said, okay, find the funding, I don't know where we'd find it, but I think it should be one of our top priorities.
Mm-hmm. I think that whole funding piece is always a frustration for
Sure.
outsiders looking at school districts, because there never seems to be enough money. There's always an issue with where the funding should come from and where it should go and how it's allocated. And I think school board members have a very tough job, because there's a lot of moving pieces. But if you have a magic bullet, I'm sure somebody would love to hear it.
Yeah. And I think that there are probably an awful lot of administrative back-end processes that can be streamlined. And I know that's true just from the work that I do Monday through Friday, 9 to 5. I know there are a lot of processes that can be streamlined, a lot of money that can be saved. If people have the will, if people have the character and the will to stand up and say this process is unnecessarily expensive, whether it's the process for, siting a building or staffing a facility or making a decision to do X, fill in the blanks there. Some of these processes are unbelievably cumbersome and, as a result, unbelievably expensive. And you spend an inordinate amount of money preparing to do something, and when you do it, the thing itself is minor compared to the buildup for it. It's just has been considered to be a casualty of being government, and I don't think it's right. So I'd like to see the Edmonds School Board trim that kind of fat wherever they can and redirect that funding into things that really actually go to the direct education of the children, and all-day kindergarten is the best place to start.
Okay. We're going to get to a portion in the interview where you can have a chance to tell voters why they should vote for you. But before we do that, is there anything else I didn't ask, any particular issues that we didn't discuss that you'd like to bring up before we go there?
I think drugs and crime, and this may well be part of why I think folks should consider voting for me. Drugs and crime don't stop at the school fence. They don't, and I would say school gate, except most of them don't have gates. They're open campuses. Drugs and crime don't stop there, and I worry about that. You don't have to drive very far in this district, and you certainly don't have to drive very far in Director District 3 to see grown men on BMXs with backpacks to know that they're drug couriers. And you don't have to look very hard into the woods to see encampments. And our kids see it. They're on the school bus. They look in these little patches of woods all over the place. And they see tents and they see people living there. And you know what's going on there. And there is such hopelessness in so many pockets of this district. It worries me and it frightens me. Would I let my children walk to school? Absolutely not. Absolutely not, because they have to walk past encampments like that. And I have to hope that those couriers that are running back and forth all day up and down these streets are going to leave them alone. So drugs and crime is something that concerns me, and I don't believe that the school district has a tight enough partnership with local law enforcement, whether that's Lynnwood Police, the Sheriff's Office, Edmonds Police, name your agency. I don't believe we have a tight enough working relationship to the extent that I would feel comfortable with my children walking back and forth, and that I feel comfortable that the schools are adequately protected. Now, I'm not saying that the police are not doing their job. That's the last thing I'm saying. What I'm saying is I worry about the same thing that the police worry about and the same thing that the educators worry about. I will say, on the flip side, just to be very, very clear about what I am very proud of, I'm very proud of the district's training program for response to unauthorized people on the campuses. Their lockdown process is tight. I think it's very well done. And the police, without a flaw, are incredibly responsive to threats on the school campuses. I've seen that a couple of times in lockdowns that I'm aware of at my own children's school. So I think that they're as responsive as they can be, but I don't think we've had enough dialogue about how we can keep the crime that exists everywhere away from the schools.
All right. Well, now I'm going to give you an opportunity to speak directly to the camera and tell voters why they should vote for you.
Sure. Thank you. I've enjoyed living in this area my whole life, almost my whole life anyway, and I've enjoyed being able to say that I came up in this district, that I was educated in the Edmonds School District, and I think they did a great job. My children love attending Edmonds schools, and I can see a long future living in this area, specifically the district that I live in right now. I want to be a part of what makes this area a place that people want to live. I want to be a part of what makes this area a place that people want to send their kids to school. I love on curriculum nights and student assembly nights when you can see the whole community parking around a school and kind of in an old-fashioned sense walking into the school and all being a community in the gymnasium. It's one of my favorite things throughout the school year to do. And I think on a grand scale, that's what I want to be a part of for the whole district. I want to be able to make this place a place where kids feel safe and parents don't worry about their children while they're at school, where parents don't worry about their children falling into an achievement gap or, heaven forbid, that 5% at the end of their career where they don't graduate on time. I'd really like to be part of a decision-making process that values the taxes that we all pay. Whether you rent or own, we all end up paying taxes that support children in schools. And those taxes should be used well. And I would like to be part of a board that values that, values the trust that you place in them, and that makes decisions with our children and the residents of the district in mind.
Okay. Well, thank you, Mark, very much for being here tonight.
Thank you.
And good luck
Thank you very
with your
much.
campaign.